$3.1 billion. That's what shareholders lost when Adelphia Communications collapsed in 2002. But the real victims weren't the wealthy portfolio holders in Manhattan or the institutional investors watching their screens on Wall Street. The real victims were the thousands of ordinary people who worked there. They watched their retirement accounts evaporate. They watched their stock options become worthless pieces of paper. They lost not just money, but security. They lost the future they'd been promised. One employee, a middle-aged woman who'd been with the company for 14 years, watched helplessly as her 401k dropped from $240,000 to just $16,000. She was 3 years away from retirement. She had grandchildren. She had medical bills. She had nowhere else to turn. Another man, a technical director, had cashed out his savings to buy company stock because the CEO kept telling everyone it was going to the moon. He believed him. Everyone believed him. John Rigas was the founder's son. He was the president. He was the voice that commanded the boardroom and convinced Wall Street that Adelphia was a titan of American telecommunications. The question we have to ask ourselves is, how did it happen? How did one of the largest cable and internet service providers in America, a company with 7 million customers, descend into the largest bankruptcy in the nation's history at that time? The story starts in rural Pennsylvania. The year is 1952. John Rigas's father, Gus Rigas, founds a small cable television company. He builds it into something substantial, something real. For decades, Adelphia is a legitimate operation. It serves customers. It employs people. It makes money the way companies are supposed to make money. But by the 1990s, the cable industry is booming. Competition is fierce. Growth becomes everything. And John Rigas, the founder's son who took over operations, becomes obsessed with expansion. He's borrowing money hand over fist. He's acquiring smaller cable companies. He's pushing deeper into debt. The company is spending money like it's water. Then something happens. The debt becomes unsustainable. The growth projections aren't materializing. Reality starts to crack against the promises he's made to investors. And instead of adjusting course, instead of being honest with the market, John Rigas and his family, because this is a family business after all, they begin cooking the books. Between 1998 and 2002, Adelphia engaged in systematic accounting fraud. They hid hundreds of millions of dollars in debt from the balance sheet. They invented fake revenue. They classified personal expenses as business expenses. They took company money, lots of it, and moved it into personal accounts. We're talking about John Rigas, his brother Timothy, and their father Gus, the founder, all participating in this elaborate deception. The unexpected twist in this story is that some of what they did was hidden in plain sight. The company disclosed related party transactions, but they buried the numbers so deep in footnotes that nobody read them carefully. They moved $300 million from the company to a private entity called Rigas Company. Then they borrowed money against those transferred assets and kept the proceeds. It's brilliant in its brazenness. It's also completely illegal. The family took money for personal use, millions and millions. John Rigas used company funds to buy and renovate a Manhattan penthouse apartment. Timothy Rigas used company money to fund his golf course. Gus Rigas, the 80-something patriarch, used company funds for personal real estate deals. Meanwhile, they were telling Wall Street that everything was fine. Better than fine. They were telling investors the company was healthy and profitable. But here's where the victims come back into focus. Because while the Rigas family was siphoning money out of the company, Adelphia's stock price was held up by false numbers and false promises. Regular people bought that stock. Regular people added it to their 401k portfolios. Regular people told their families, invest in Adelphia, it's going to be big. And they believed the numbers because the numbers came from the company's financial statements. They came from audits. They came from a system that's supposed to be trustworthy. The fraud unraveled in 2002. An investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission, combined with pressure from Wall Street analysts who were finally doing their homework, forced the company to restate its financials. Suddenly, the debt appeared. Suddenly, the fake revenue vanished. The stock, which had been trading in the teens, collapsed. Shareholders lost everything. And by May of 2002, Adelphia filed for bankruptcy. What followed was the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history at that time. John Rigas and Timothy Rigas were arrested. So was Gus Rigas, the 90-year-old founder. The trial lasted months. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial experts testified about the schemes. SEC investigators laid out the deceptions. For the Rigas family, there was nowhere to hide. John Rigas was convicted of conspiracy, falsifying financial statements, and wire fraud. He received a 15-year prison sentence. Timothy Rigas received a 20-year sentence. Gus Rigas, due to his age and the judge's mercy, received a lighter sentence. He passed away in prison in 2005 at the age of 94. But here's where the story becomes tragic in a different way. The criminal convictions and prison time didn't restore what the employees and shareholders lost. Bankruptcy proceedings eventually returned only pennies on the dollar. People who lost their entire retirement on Adelphia stock received almost nothing back. The family assets were seized, but there simply wasn't enough money to compensate everyone who'd been harmed. A widow in Ohio who had $50,000 invested in Adelphia stock received a settlement of $8,000. A former manager in Pennsylvania who'd been promised that stock options would fund his children's college education watched that dream disappear. These aren't statistics. These are human beings whose trust was violated, whose future was stolen. The Rigas family served their time. John Rigas spent years in federal prison. But from a certain perspective, the punishment was incomplete. They lived lavish lives for years off stolen money. They experienced wealth and privilege that their fraud had created. Meanwhile, the people who trusted them had to rebuild from nothing. What Adelphia reveals is that financial crime isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about the cascade of human consequences that follows when those numbers are lies. It's about the destruction of trust in institutions. It's about the broken dreams of ordinary people who did everything right, who invested carefully, who followed the rules, and still got destroyed because people in power chose to deceive them. The Adelphia scandal led to reforms in accounting practices and corporate governance. It contributed to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which tightened financial reporting requirements. These are institutional responses to institutional crimes, but they don't answer the real question, which is how to make victims whole, how to return what was stolen, how to restore what was broken. That question remains unanswered. Follow the Grift Reports for more financial crime stories.